Portney Sailor. And the chosen people, the Lamb, spoken with the long ah of the children of that land, had spread out everywhere and rebuilt the shattered remnants of their country and established a golden artifice out of the black matter spilling from desert wells and ornaments of oil rigging scattered around the hills like black holes. Randomly, I happened to find myself in Jorna, the city of thieves and passengers, said my guidebook. Hermits and messengers, pigeons of the diplomatic tradition, came forth into Jorna and remained for a short while amidst the worst of social situations. And only to find a timetable for scheduling an oasis, to wait as his spiritual essence moved to the holy zone of transport to another realm across the earth. I, Address Gulag Forensis, Portney Sailor, have arrived at 12:37, hour of the Lord Texas, and ransom and self-container for my travel across Elba, the land of the Lamb, as it's known in the north. Frozen hell holes burn in my memories, and possession by now seen semblances of psychic stargazers. But the passion projected a returned winning lottery number directly over my theater of war. Praise he who submitted in prayer my zone of sentience, later approached me in my labor and waitlisted me to attend Jorna for a century, and eventually my name came up. I hold testament of my travel thus far in these words and document for my own peace of mind and heartbeat at ease as the Hallandonic tradition of seers looks deep down into you and pulls out stately nerves which contain fears and relate only to past memories which well and create visions of the past but never the future. Hallucinogenic disorders trouble the people of my land, as I assume they do everywhere on Aerta and its satellite, except for the time-locked island of Elba. I arrived yesterday in an hour of stress, and lastingly they sent my corporeal frame out into the street, so geometrically aligned that the perfect fragment of my imagination took me out of where I was and automatically into my remembrance, and I saw only the frozen winterlands of the poles, and the words of the drills who they used to prove their theories, and the holes wherein ice picks chisel out ancient myths of hyper-beings of the past. And yet we travel into future words, and never into the past, as every generation holds amnesia for its singing and drinking nights, and never sleep, as the Durdrick has that effect. Archaeologically, the features revealed from the frost needed sentience in collaboration for their revelations to come to pass. And so I, for years of night, drank the helix liquor Durdrick, and never slept, but worked to demarcate the great pillars and inverted pyramids of the ice ancients. And aurora constellations up in the skies looked down always on us in our depressions along the frozen landscape, and blew winds to chill us, and worked against the warmth of our genetic draft. But Elba was warm, and rather than scientific excavation, they looked and utilized the sun, and rafters rang with subsonic copper rings vibrationally modified to electrically stabilize silicon batteries. New arrivals entered through the porthole of the time lock at Jorna, and wandered out into the street with their luggage or sacks of gadgetry for relinquishing mind-memory simulation coming back into visuality, i.e. the hallucinations which plagued me for years below the aurora found their way into the brain stems of every other remote country inside the rule of the Gaffas, projecting their influence outside Elba rather than amidst its own denizens who think in a free wheel of choice ordained by the truth of the Lamb. The sunny cityscape would appear and alarm me with its bright burning rooftops shaped like brushes painting the sky, and then fade, leaving only the underlying geometrical strivings of the sim, reminding me of the superimposition of my existence in the north. And I had to repeat my mantra again, that I was now safe in Jorna, away from the pits of nighttime capitals and desperate ice pickaxes. Away from the north and now on the sea, so green with curtailed algae which grows thickly on the waters of this place. The curated nature, elephantic trees freely growing in the center of the metropolis and spreading their canopy way out to the far ends of the city, the walls and beyond and into the spreading desert, nuclear slime mold communicators sinking into the sands and retaining in ropes the data between mind molds of the lamb's chemistry. And the man with the feather cap had met me in the street, and his wings spread out and vanished from my vision, beyond the lines and into a void in which I could not redirect my gaze. I tried not to look. I felt myself longing, in a way, to wander into where these little grids permeate into everything around and in my sight, and transform as little triangular energies translate quantum positioning into coded mathematics. And he led me down alleyways among the paintbrush buildings, and understanding their halfway to glory in Jorna, after all, the halfway house of the universe. Re-emerging geocentrism in the distant past, or else the second decade of the new millennial bankruptcy erupted in Egypt and recalibrated that system, and first ammonia molecules reverberated from the cyclic tunnels welling up from sepulchres, and the dead woke in number there, their bodies the most preserved of all in the atmosphere. And the spiritual heads related from volcanic ash assumed ethereality, and into the pyramid of painted facades, spilling light from tapestry woven out of fixtures set deep in the apses in themselves, and held the photonic righteousness in their triangular tops, and wove the sky into the swelling ground, feeding the trees with energetic healing. The Bhagavad Gita, among hymning translations around the globe, had flown the reincarnated lasting ancestors. He offered me a sniff or snuff of some kind. My bare feet stood in the dust of the sun-spent sand, which tingled in its random unwiring of my telescoping wristband. "Don't tell anyone I told you," said the bird-headed man with sandals, and afterwards disinhaled into my eye, which blew away while hundreds of tiny insects stung me, and for a moment I saw the symbols unlaid in the centers of the grid came alive and spelled out side effects of my imposition in great detailed hieroglyphic sentencing. And I was out of my mind, and I heard my heart beating along the scripted rhythms, and at last I knew I was out of the simulacra. And then I was in again, and on my feet, and then on my hands, and retching on the sandpaper around. And I asked him about his hairs so fine in the spring hat that he wore, and he told me that alas its twine was stolen from an eagle feather genetically modified to manufacture organic compounds necessary in his head to grow from follicles in red plumage. And how at first they wilted, and he knew that upcoming technologies had deceived him into paying through the nose for nothing. But as the hourglass flew, and over time, and strange cutting-edge elixirs ranged his aisles at pharmacy bazaars, and spray-on tablets of coin embers enveloped his scalp when he willed, and when he had the scrap necessary to sell. Then the withered embryonal scales grew out, and he now groomed his quilted colors, airily dyed. And on and on. And I picked up my wrapping and reattached my wristband, now emitting a reddish frequency radiating internal hatred and rasping at me in a dialect which sounded strange, and I realized it was my own. Blowing egg sand in my cortical nerve through the eye, was the only way to move from written hand signals into understanding the physiognomy of mind-brow energy waves transmitted through looking into my non-glassy telepathy. And I noticed a fly with a long tail with 3 pinchers looking for some meat to prey on, and for a time I watched transfixed as the creature curtailed an interlocking beetle for its lunch, and waved a while with its segments looking for triangles to rest on in the side patterning of the tapestry hangings along the walls. I knew the bug in the side of the geometry was my bird guide, and he climbed onto the edge of my extended little finger, and curled around my thumb and into the raging bracelet on my palm. Forthright, the blinking thing stopped working entirely, and I felt the color drain from my face and re-enter through my chin, which made me stop and smile for a time. I was free of my magisterial cruisers who would be constantly on the search for their absentee master chiseler, and the thing stole into the bronze brace around my forearm, now silent and still, and vanished except for a pair of whiling scissor arms grasping at the air. One step, I was outside the egg sim, as it's called. Won't you speak back to me through time, for I speak now to you from my own 3,000 years. The Hellenes, whom you value so highly in your time, began their dark age and climbed the Apollonian mountain to total domination of the globe. 2 years since, and all has fallen, and blind and one-eyed lookers relate back to home runaways. 2 years since vision and last hour before annihilation, so they say. 7 since the egg, and 14 to the day of the trumpet's sound. The world has changed, and I witness and have seen all transition, though so much difference has engulfed our planet. I call back to you to hear my prayers and time to end all direction. What else is there but the Lamb's planning, or else maybe for you free will, and now not even division might carry us through the labyrinth of decision we have chosen. Where I went along the hills that day I don't remember, but I made my way through Jorna, eventually finding myself at Waterside, a bay beneath the towering spires announcing prayer, railways, interminable natural outcrops of dangerous runoff, the black ooze of the gateway to God's grace, a gift, arid amid all the ships going up and down with the waves, the timorous tide, and cold rhythmic gold embrace the reflective layer. The blue slick given rest amidst all this red water. Alarming in its extent of washed, missable like luckily oil and water aren't. Read randomly, he had told me, and now he resided in my wristwatch, showing me where to write and how to navigate the sidelines of the deserted harbor. For 4 of the fleets were out protecting the seas from privateering. On the other side of the bay, some 700,000 kilometers out, stood the resurgence of the Salathiel, the great eye of Osha, and eternally at odds with the Elbans. Salathians had returned to the planet among the waking dead in the far corner of the Sahara, and now terracotta living spaces of the Mazanesians, drudging the Atlantic beyond the bay. Tla ruled in the west, where they're again chopping heads. But anyway, not a soul stood on the bay, the dock stretching far out beyond the library, and towards an aisle, way out with a tiny light post supported stretching back into memories. And throughout the day, I sat on the dock of the bay and waited. When the sun fell at once in the east, reflected once or twice by the moon, really me and my wristwatch, knew all we could see of Elba, or rather just Jorna, was the geometry and tapestric traditions. What else besides thieves? And diplomats boarding ponds and palm trees to travel abroad, and seafaring broadside beasts now telling me the secret through the timetable on my forearm. Where was everyone? I remembered 3 aside in my mannequin oasis, traveling to and fro yesterday, and a million working administrators dressed in robes, hurrying between semblance screens and transmitting messages with their parrot familiars, some, others with rats or token insect totems, none with gadgetry at all like my trio. And anyway, what happened there, inside the temple brush tip? Where else could anyone be besides? There was work to do in Elba, it seemed, and nothing could happen to stop it. Its cities called prayer and no one in the streets to hear? Or maybe just in Jorna? Where were the bazaars? Where were the paradisal garden in at nighttime neighborhoods that he imagined? Not imaged only. I thought I had seen it somewhere. Before I left. No, that was too soon. It must have been before all that. Where else? In my guidebook, of course. Where'd that gone? I checked my purse and rummaged through my luggage. 3 shirts and a coin, plus my massive spare pair of overalls. No guidebook at all. It was gone. I looked around, then looked up at the barren shop lofts amid stretcher bars of armory scaffolding. Suddenly, I saw the moon, and it looked like a silver doubloon out of Tenochtitlan. The inlaid face, protruded and pockmarked, appeared like the sliver of a shield held sideways. Right then, I looked back in my bag and held out the money I had. They had lent me at the entrance to the shop fronts, and I dropped it willy-nilly into the vast black oil slick. The weight of the water itself suspended the heavy piece of precious metal-coated stone, and we stood there for a time, the coin and me, until I tried to reach down and pull it out. The water wasn't very low, and the dock high, so I could attempt to extend my thumb and forefinger into the primordial soup. I picked it out, and all the gold came with it, leaving only a forged river rock with its inlaid shape of a painted mark. And the stein glowed for a short while, burning ember red, and then went out again. I looked deeper into its queer facade, and embossed structural flaws inside the rim was a jagged piece of quartz, which mycologically grew mushroom blocks out quite alike with their swooping curved mosques. Cymbeline said, "How do I know it's you? How can I hear you in my head?" How, by your eye, of course. I know it's you. By my open eye, she wrote softly, and I heard her clearly. And each word was spelled out solid and true throughout time, along with a lost rhyme coupled with it. What was the rhyme? "And wiser I," she scribed, and introduced herself, but I knew now so quiet and restingly already Cymbeline. Cymbeline. And she led me by the wrist through the opening shop front by the ocean receding slick, and rich cloths and woven moving miracles illustrated therein, rewarding me with the sight that as the night fell, the doors of the apartments opened wide and sock-wearing tunic-bearers sidled along the walls of the enlightening city. Cymbeline said, "You can see them now," she wrote, "because of that seal you've cleaned so slyly by the waterside." But why? You're wrong, and she proved it by taking my hand in hers and raising the stone in my enclosed fist up to my opening eye. And as I envisaged the monolith engraved, and I looked and saw written above what I hadn't thus seen the word grace. And my face turned, and according to my vision saw only white caves of frozen stuff, the same shade as the stone, and renting a rhyme time and again, I sang to the dreaming Durdrick drinkers. Fluid flame, swallowed through silver straws, a game of crow's cause follows law and order, sort of like riding down canals in Venice, plumbing depths for tubes and wastes away while we carve out the standings of eternity. Drink the draught of all things. And yanked the stone away from my face, and I was alone again. I wandered down the vacant street, at once alarmed and set aside strain from my recollected, transpositioned vision. And where had these wandering denizens of the city of Jorna, where had this friend or foe flown from me? For a moment only I had seen, and now from looking inside this penny in this world had made me see and taken my sight twice. I hurried back down the ramparts, gazing directly on the pill-like coin interior with written word grace in it only. Cautiously I, flipping it anxiously between my nails and looked on the back, saw inscribed, in the other side, right above, signaled the phrase, "will reveal" on its tail. I hunted after where I had seen beyond the limits of my sense precept, and threw back before I knew what I could do with these knowings. I needed to get away from these ghostly people who are here and not at the same time. I shambled out onto the dock and wandered aimlessly along its one dimension, and before long I had seen the entire city stretching out above me in its vast complexity to my rear, and before me stood the gleaming lamp-post, which also towered thoroughly high enough into the air with glittering lighthouse clearly there. My stamp with oil slick still clutching in my right palm dripped with blue from my finger trailed, and I pressed on as the moon flew up and around everywhere, propelled by whatever established egg gadget drew tracers on the night sky, eliminating for several moments any ability to make visible the starry river of Orion. Its yoke held and toted the lunar globe now and reflected its sheen off of the little coin in my unclean hand. And with the same photons bouncing everywhere and splitting off into decaying energies illuminated with the oils in the waters around the sides of the pier extending off into the distance a shine similar. And frequencies met at wave functions stopping to radio with one another paired particulates of quantum tunneling and other jargon emitted from the imposition of math by the Sims calculates. Sunny rays conflicted with my own limited vision and reminded me of the sun lamp rock crystals scattering across the North Pole, and I felt the fantasy coming on strong again to relive the terror of that score, but wrestled in my mind for a moment and only just managed to avoid falling over the boards and into the suspension of shivering night solution. The bay called out to me to make the decision to stumble and unite with the noxious phosphorescence billowing off the water and tremble as I sank into union with the sea. But I kept my head fixed forward and tread lightly on the creaking wood weathered by the circulatory movements of the moon. I had one notion in mind, which was to climb the tall light tower and consult those workers still visible in its single-pointed spire, with dome and feather-touching sky. I could only assume that there would be there the people I wanted to see in the square, and I wagered against the loss of my now polished pebble coated in slime from the waters slipping it silently into the entrance fee foyer for a tour up the spiral staircase at the end of the long trek to the islet. While no one greeted me to show me through the lighthouse levels, a brick shifted on the wall and held out a receipt for my payment, along with a package which I unwrapped revealing a shiny new guidebook, the newest addition to the life in Jorna. I read the first paragraph, which said, "Jorna, first tip to free the traveler from sight, key included, douse it, then head for the lighthouse, got it?" The rest of the pages were blank, and I stowed the tiny tome in my satchel and continued through the swinging doors down a long hallway which led to a well and a glass case containing stairs inlaid with gold, all gold everywhere. Squalor as the elevator went downwards into the pit of melt runoff, from the spitting ice down along all sides through to the fires beneath and stoking coal unearthed or uniced from the glowing ammonia basins. We stood in line and waited as the cafe administered lei and a cold soup, which we washed down with broth, and drank a stalagmite of druck, and back to work. In the fiery furnace stood 2 teleprompters on wheels with availing eyes to guide us in retreat through the warmer area. Turn and off my feet and back up the stair, the ever-ending stair which blankly evinced me of my surrounding, and threw me back in northward vision, construing both the lighthouse and the rent ground with fire breath and warmth, that thing we took back with us in the pits of our stomachs. And always, and in the past, and never the future, our hallucinations rang true as the bell at the service of cafeteria foods. And the bell at the top of the tower reflected the moon and shone with frequent wanderings to look for castaways, souls who have 7 or southward written on their eye windows, and saying to me a few tumbling words becoming wavelength wires to my spirit. That's me, 6 and 7, how when we listen, the numbers that correspond to hell and heaven. I remember looking down and seeing a spotlight on a sporting vessel with flag raised and sails cast down to catch the reflections off the inlet lake. I knew the banner well, that fitting into grooves along the ocean's tiny nodules, gritting the egg's sentience through and fluttering in a long free ellipse along the ship's way. Northerners from Quebecade and ransom wares for sell and trade would take me back if they found me, but here the lamp house of liquid light transferred its watchful hourglass again and saw another ship of quite a distant origin. I have seen the feet of Tlaw locked in the camp of trees and feeding his growing pyramids and mixture of human arteries and bleeding red Brazil wood. The two combined fed his growing inside garden of the Mazanesian menagerie. The third time the reversed vessel transmitted its ember timetable and shifted to a new craft, a cargo fleet sending silos of saboteurs to their destinations across the islands of Elban Dominion. I had not noticed these tricorn carracks before, and as I sailed down the trembling hypotenuse of the Scalene, sending me straight toward the freight loot and all its oars, cannonballs of cast iron flew all around me in my descent, and several lamb lightships had taken down one of the Canadian frontiersmen's interceptors, who now retreated from the inlet island and its lighthouse. I landed on the top of the stacks of gunpowder cube boxes and barrels, I believe. That's my year, I would say, and they would laugh and say, yes, we know about you all, and I would say, why me? And then they would say the opposite of whatever they had just said. They don't know anything about me after all. Ah, well. It occurred to me they were lying, but I thought, trust these time-traveling contradictors and whatever they'll have to say. Goodbye, eventually, here we go. Perhaps the most important fact that no one realizes is that time in Atlantis begins at its sinking and progresses backward in shifting paranormal drifting eye rainbows before your eyes, and its history retreats into a glorious distant past for us future, told me they lies in the past, and only through diligent study have they, the ones in 33,000 BC, discovered how to travel before, or for you, after the initial sinking. And lo and behold, they've resurrected the town in 2033. We made our way into the time chamber. A quick switch in directionality said Poe will take you nowhere. You have to crack it by 2,000 years or more to override the administrator password. Luckily, we Atlanteans existed 12,000 years ago, and so a factor of 6, and then they'll send you where you're aiming. I'm aiming? Said I. Yes, not we. Welcome to Terminal 4, it said on my screen. I looked around and they were gone. And towing me along, we reached a gilt gourd-shaped gasket with a chain wire landing pad, and we dusted off seaweed clingings and as we strode toward the time lock and opened the way into breathable, living, virtuous, God-given oxygen. My sinuses were swollen from all the salt water, and I flapped like a trout fishing pole dumped overboard. Simple life, but only ever switching, swapping cards, stealing some from your can and giving back cartoon confetti. I could feel myself drifting and my mind set to sunrise, and all the words mingled, almost freezing for a second. And all I knew was a trailing, chanting, timorous, nasally voice, my own, or some other spirit's. But I alone heard and lost my way labyrinthine axonic pulsations and metaphoric euphoria. Married ye? Noy, never. Me craft prevents me always steering into and out of tides. Change away my mind wandered as we sank deeper. They both held my arms, and we all went down into the warm ocean. Where were those few charitable souls I had known in my previous to our sorry sinking tale, lost or else now changed? Before the change again, and ceaseless change without monumental capable foundations for our secret desire for freedom. We knew we had no time when the winds came. This was something else, and no Rome could withstand a blast of hurricane power like this, although they tried, and assassination attempts and success brought our state to a broken, belligerent barony. When we thought we hit the drop-off point of our each separate and long drawn-out physical possession by illness, I was in Mexico and swam on beaches with water that were blue, and rather unlike the red algae-infested Aztec tide that reflect off of the rehabitated Teotihuacan in the center of the great Mexican lake today. But no, back then we drank in views and climbed mysterious mountains. I've sang songs and seen tiny-limbed men as long as ropes defend themselves from the dumb, dangerous, duplicated crocodiles that roam the streaming beaches in Birmingham. The Louisiana Delta exceeds even what had been D.C., and gone are any towns along the shore, torn by water. And now the citizens throw wicked spirit glam rock jam bands and fiestas beneath the waves. A train goes down beneath. I never saw the city before it sank, and extended my youthful travelings all over the southern country and few great cities in the north like Salem or Boston as it was known, or Chicago. Once I was reprimanded for stepping on a boat in one of the great canals and received a proud tour of the city's fine waterside architecture, like decorated American pyramid temples, for example. I've been to the wild savanna of Georgia and Carolina and seen the wicked batteries which they use to fuel their preserved metropolis. It always changed, said Cherry. But I don't misunderstand her secret understanding. You want to get specific? I held her hand, and that was all we had the ambition for, foolishly. Going back to my house was a source of home feeling in my room, the great escape, which only amplified in the months and years to come, and perhaps led to my ultimate blasting off, or out of town. Poe told me why he hadn't killed me was because I looked hungry, and after all, it had nothing to do with any prophecy of a green emerald bow tie and white robes, and I found this strange, but he said that I could count him as a friend. And then he smiled, and he and his friend exchanged knowing winks, and then the boat went down beneath the waves. And he took me up on deck, where we passed the severed souls of many Nova Scotian sailors, and some with the heavy branding on their bodies of old British Columbian compatriots. His fellow, whose name I did not catch, but addressed my captor by the name of Poe, gestured toward the boat, a small dinghy with atomized diamond hull, and so we rowed. But soon I found myself face to face with a figure who was not pasty like a Canuck from Alberta or Wisconsin, but black with raging purple eyes, in line with those stories of Atlantean new men who stayed youthful, and warned me that I should not move or else I would feel his meat cleaver. I stepped, despite myself, into the shining light from the porthole and flashed the green bow tie in a gesture of meekness. Widening eyes, he said only, "Come with me, the prophecy must begin subsequently." But enough of these zipping sailboat seafarers who traded in volcanic concrete and salt and challenged the Canadian oceanic naval doctrine. By chance, I found myself in white robes and green tie in the basement of my ship's destined slavery for me upon arrival, and footsteps coming to find me in my ridiculous outfit and not in my hammock. Would they saw off my little fingers and tear me in 3 pieces to harvest ATP? But of course, all before the mighty eye of Oser raised from the sea in Atlantean plastic island of the Sahara, quicksands, exploding waves of African waters blew the Mediterranean all over southern France and nearly all of Italy islands in the Alps, and devastated Paris and rushed floods in Bavaria, but rose from the old Reichskat and returned to the greening Mauritanian mountains, defenders of Greece in Magyar, Old Hunnic territory, cavalry charges to tank radar-seeking drone warfare in unending war in Ukraine. Not now against the country of Russia, but with Chechnya steppe-tech nomad masters of the mechanisms, since they rediscovered Soma, speaking in Pi dialects received from Confucian's 7G radio towers who have simulated mind control in Tibet. The newfound Cairo revival brought back Byzantine icons who showed humans in Rome the light of holy conquest of holy lands outside their borders. And Europe and Asia looked down on the cross's zombified second coming, but Germans and Poles swiftly mingled orthogonal dark practices in medicine, and splayed Italy and France joined with Macedon to swarm new Siberian farmers. Flashback to my youth in 2016, when Trump from east to west swept an election. Later, he would from prison wake the dead in number, returning with the holy book which, written in a mysterious decipherable script, he said came from God, and not from internet forums which wrote the new rules of the systemic revivifying of spiritual benefits factions. He was heralded as the new Q, who wrote the initial documents to a few Bible's verses. "King?" said I. "Buy me a fast food sandwich, I'm starving," said the other mass of green, and so the arm begrudgingly slouched away, but I noticed a new set of clothes on my slave quarters hammock. Sitting down, I threw on a white robe and a shimmering velvet green bow tie, which fit my neck perfectly. Sudden knocking suggested I hide, and so I fell behind the pyramids of shifting cargo. The decider of my fate was when I turned my head and saw the vessel craft from which I was lying on my back. And looking up just then, a massive green cloud reached down and grabbed me in an emerald Milky Way arm, magically mentioning my name and saying, "From now on I name you Mab, and King will make her see you through the seer of Abel. Tell me, my worrying one, what do you think you will do when you're Groenland boat ashore?" Canadian supremacy on the northern Cape of Maine and Quebec way outmatched my New Jersey nation-state, and demanded Boston and Venetia, and the tribute of sacrificial victims in numbers. Was I captured? When once I awoke from Manning's simulated single combat, I felt a crack on the back of my head quite unlike my meta-narrative. I woke to great nebulas of glowing Greenland bodies knocking into one another as monstrous gods. Way west, cooler temperatures allow the hemp, biologically manufactured over miles and miles of henge benefits of Denver burnings, which heat the growing cold nights and provide an increase in certain molecules throughout the northern hemisphere. I'm just giving you a backdrop of the place I came from. How it happened we may come to know, but my tour of shared America began in military drilling down machinated canine regiments from northern Canada, the modern frontier, since all the ice moved or melted, Groenland wreckage of previous civilization long since passed under fossilized ice, melting from the inside out. The northern icebergs were melting once more, and the earth with new terracotta technology could warm itself to provide necessary living condition for the people beneath. I built the dungeons in western PA to deal damage to encroaching Amazon rainforests, a plethora of elephants from imported southern savannas in Carolina and Florida, each a bustling barter economy with terracotta living spaces crawling out and floating far out from the islands. They cauterize and atomize the plastics and concentrate carbons to diamonds, fueling astroturf surfing silicon batteries. Staying starbound, they want to stay at ease with the new Cherokees of inland Arkansas, who've risen from the dead and stream like Peter's tears of rage, revenge, and renewed radiation treatment program. No vote. They'll toss you to their pelts, which walk like dogs in mythological accuracy, said my 3 coworkers driving home from catering. There are many spirits who have returned to the land, for example, the ethereal, ephemeral, moth-men and women of Tidewater River, which flows 20,000 miles through water-sunken D.C. Through 3 years after famine flood, fiery body diseases west of our world, but heard in a kind of massive inheritance catastrophe, what a world we have received. Such a knocking down of all-knowing nations scientifically researched and plumbing now useless. The world has shown itself strange and yet divine, and so divided by collective doubt and spiritual layabouts, possession between now seen semblances of psychic stargazers and shameful hell-raisers. Joyous, doubtful mindset growing up in rural Jersey, I knew much about nature. See, when the sea fish migrated shorewise, I went inland and brought boats for the bayou. Becoming flood silhouettes from satellites, no tall building. Venice plumbs depths for tubes to waste away, but finds no excess salvageable from previous streets, only canoes, and hovering Daniel above the city as feeble fragmentation sheds like beams over NYC. But I knew never of the city, only my infancy in Philadelphia and resultant sergeant-occupied previous power plants in the east. Now nature overlaid by mushrooms like in Nausicaa, perhaps in some realm besides the cordyceps ant mania spread to steppes westward, but only I seemed to be beyond the periphery. When I was 33, I began to travel all over this new world we know now so exactly as we imagined it in the 90s.